Hi guys, in my previous video I discussed the white matter, the basic concepts of the white matter. Today I'm going to talk about the ascending tracts. So white matter of the spinal cord acts like a highway and tracts going up to carrying the sensory information from our skins, our muscles and joints to the brain. So if you look at here precisely, this is the cross section of the spinal cord. So you can see this gray matter structure. It's called the gray matter. It's a butterfly shaped structure. It's called gray matter, which is surrounded by the white matter. So today I'm going to talk about one of the most important ascending tracts. So as I mentioned earlier, ascending tracts carrying the sensory information from our skin, our muscles, our tendons of muscles to the brain through the spinal cord and brain stem. So how they are doing that? We have neurons, a chain of 3 neurons connecting to each other, synapsing to each other to get into the cortex, sensory cortex. So if you look at here, I have 3 wires. So these 3 wires, if you connect these 3 wires, you can allow the electrons to convey through these 3 wires. So neurons in the sensory pathway or ascending tracts, they are connecting to each other like 3 wires. So 3 neurons connecting to each other or synapsing to each other and make a chain or make a tract to allow the action potential to go up to the brain. So we have 3 neurons. It's called order neuron. We have first order neuron, second order neuron, and third order neuron. So as you know, each neurons have their own cell body. Within the cell body we have nucleus and we have short dendrites and one long axon. So when you are studying the ascending tracts, as I mentioned before, we have 3 order neurons. You should first ask yourself, where is the cell body of these 3 order neurons? And the second question is that where they are synapsing to each other. And the third question, where they are crossing from one side to the other side. If you could answer those questions precisely, it means that you have learned the ascending tracts. So as I mentioned before, I'm going to talk about one of the important ascending tracts. It's called Spinothalamic Tract. So if you look at carefully the name of this tract, it gives you some information. Spinal means it starts at the spinal cord. Thalamic means it goes up through the brain to get into the thalamus. Spinothalamic tract. So as you know, we have some receptors in our skin and in our muscles and in our the tendon of the muscles. So those specific receptors receiving the different sensory information. So we have pain, temperature, we have proprioceptive, we also have pressure, vibration. All those sensory information are received from the environment through the receptors. And then the receptors connecting to their first order neuron. So action potential will carry through the axon of the first order neuron to get into the CNS, central nervous system. So which sensory information are carried by this tract? So the sensory information that are carried by this spinothalamic tract are pain, temperature, crude touch, and pressure. So these information are carried by the spinothalamic tract from the skin and from the muscles and getting into the spinal cord. So the first question is, where is the cell body of the first order neuron? So most of the time you can find the cell body of the first order neuron outside the spinal cord within the dorsal root ganglion. So dorsal root ganglion, it's a bulge on the way of the spinal, on the way of the dorsal root. So you can see this model again. So here we have the ventral root, contains the motor neuron, and this is the dorsal root. It contains sensory neuron. So on the way of the dorsal root, there is a bulge here. It's called spinal ganglion. So I explained these details in my previous videos. Please watch it. So the first order neuron cell body is here. So imagine that this is the cell body of the first order neuron. It is within the dorsal root ganglion, and it's a unipolar. Uni means one. It has one axon, and it splits into peripheral and central branch. Peripheral going out of the central nervous system into the skin. So it connects to the receptors, or receptors receiving this sensory information and making the action potential. The action potential will be carried by the first order neuron. So then it gets into the spinal cord. So what will happen when it gets into the spinal cord? If you take a cross section through the spinal cord, you can find something like this. This butterfly-shaped structure is the gray matter, which is surrounded by the white matter. So when it gets into the spinal cord, it synapses onto the cell body of the second order neuron. So the second order neuron cell body is here, the dorsal horn. And what about the axon? The axon of the second order neuron crossing the spinal cord from one side to the other side through this white commissure. It's called ventral commissure. And then it lands here between the ventral column and lateral column. It's called ventral lateral column here. And then it goes up like this. The cell body here, and then it crosses from the one side to the other side, and then it ascends and makes spinothalamic tract. This is the spinothalamic tract. So you can find the spinothalamic tract here. It goes up, crossing the brainstem. Here is the brainstem to get into the brain. Here is the brain. Within the brain, here we have the thalamus. So in thalamus, it synapses onto the third order neuron. So the third order neuron cell body is here, and the axon projects up to the somatosensory cortex of the brain. So as you see here, we have three order neurons. The first order neuron cell body is within the dorsal root ganglion, and then it synapses onto the cell body of the second order neuron, which is within the dorsal horn of the gray matter of spinal cord. Then the axon crossing from one side to the other side through the ventral commissure, and then it lands here, ventrolateral column of white matter of spinal cord, and then it goes up, ascending up which makes the spinothalamic tract, crossing the brainstem, getting into the thalamus to synapses and to the cell body of the third order neuron, and the axon of the third order neuron projecting up to the cortex of the brain. Now I'm going to highlight the crossing point of the spinothalamic tract. As I mentioned before, the axon of the second order neuron crossing the spinal cord from one side to the other side. In neuroanatomy, the crossing the axon is called the decussation. So the decussation will occur here from one side to the other side. It is clinically significant. So it means that, for example, if the left side of the spinal cord for any reason has been damaged, you will lose the sensory information from the right side, the opposite side, because the crossing happens here at the spinal cord. So it is clinically significant, the decussation or crossing over from one side to the other side. As a whole, if you have any questions, please put your questions in the comments and receive feedback. Thank you so much.